everyone. Thank you for joining us. The title of this session is How AI Helps Revenue Teams Build and Share Expertise. The panel will be moderated by Zaid Anam, the co-founder and CEO of Cresta, who's joined us from Barker. Luckily, I have an MIT mug full of coffee. We also have Orlando Hampton, the EVP of Client and Partner Services at Affinity, and Omar Tabakal, the VP and GM of Cisco's Contact Center at Cisco.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ruchi. Omar and Orlando, it's so great to have you here and so great to have this conversation.
Thank you.
Perhaps we can just start, since the audience is broad and there's really a lot of folks from different demographics. Really, where are you seeing artificial intelligence impacting businesses, impacting the modern workplace? Omar, perhaps your perspective.
Yeah, sounds good. First thing I do is just, what do you do at a contact center? Each of us probably here have had to be on a line holding for a contact center agent or for a chat. And essentially you want three things. You want them to solve your problem. You want them to solve it easily, and you want them to do it in a way that makes you feel good, then perhaps is polite. So AI can help with all of that. In particular, what happens is the first thing is people are sitting in a line waiting for a queue. And it's kind of like one of those flattening the curve problems where too many people are lined up and it's above your contact center human agent capacity. So then what you do is you deploy a voice bot or a chat bot, and that tries to automatically answer your question. And if they're able to do that, of course, you reduce the number of people that have to go through to a human agent. If they're unable to do it, you escalate to a human. So that's step number one. Step number two is you then have to get it to the right human. And Orlando, of course, is going to have a lot to say about that. Step number three is it gets through to a human. They're now talking to you. You have to share the context from the conversation from the bot to the human. It gets to a human, and now AI can step in and listen next to the agent and say, hey, based on what I'm hearing this person say, I've seen a previous case solved in the following way, and they're kind of nudging the agent to get a better answer. And then when the call is over, the AI can kick in and say, hey, why don't I wrap this call up for you instead of you, the agent, spending 5 minutes writing up notes, I'll write it for you automatically. And then even after that, you might be able to nudge the supervisor and say, hey, I noticed something odd about this call. Here's some coaching you can do to the agent. So those are kind of like the 5 areas or so where AI is just going to completely transform the way contact centers work. And what's exciting about that is it's not all about like replacing agents with AI. Some of it's about making the human better at their job, faster at their job, more accurate at their job. So it becomes welcomed by the agents themselves. So that's kind of the broad areas that I see AI impacting the contact center.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sort of layout is exactly what sort of that all the different pieces as they tie together into the contact center. There's so many surface areas and application points for it. But stepping back one step in terms of when we look at the business opportunity, the business impact of all the different offices and different organizations in a business, Orlando, can you speak to a little bit perhaps why is the contact center really the best place to start in terms of these applications?
Sure. So there's quite a few places, quite a few things to think about when you think about the advantages of AI kind of over a normal human interaction or kind of a random interaction. So the place I generally like to start is that any place where there is kind of a random pairing of people. In those cases, AI is obviously going to be superior to just a random selection. So think about a random selection to Omar's point of you call into a contact center and you speak to an agent. You really, if you called in 3 seconds later, you would have spoken to a different agent in a random environment. If that agent had wrapped up their last call 5 seconds sooner, they would have spoken to a different customer. So although there are certain skills-based rules, perhaps the customer had a language preference, or perhaps the customer was a certain value and there was a subset of agents that you go to, the actual handoff itself is random, meaning that if I just called in a few seconds later, I would have randomly spoken to someone else. If you use intelligence there and you can make a decision where you have some information about the person who's calling in and some information about the person taking the call, you can effectively just drive a pairing that is more successful than random over time. And then obviously at scale and in contact center operations, you can often have that scale. You can have significant impacts across the business just by making a very subtle change between a random pairing and an intelligent one. So it's one of the places why contact centers in particular have been such a fertile ground for AI.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's really so exciting about the space. Really, the contact center in the first is really the first interaction for a lot of folks, especially now as a lot of interactions are moving to digital channels. And so what's really happening is that the company and their brand is really represented over these digital channels. It's these interactions over the phone, interactions over chat, and the brand is really won or lost in those interactions. And so what Omar sort of laid out, what Orlando really laid out is that sort of ultimate customer experience, that's really won and lost in that channel. And right now, the key challenge is any sort of challenge you have for those kinds of channels is a huge amount of sort of discrepancies in performance or onboarding or enablement of the teams, huge amounts of queues where you're sort of leading to very long wait times, suboptimal pairings between a customer and a rep. Really, those are really opportunities that are ripe for artificial intelligence to come in and help improve, optimize, and just make a much more effective transaction. And so it's really a long-term customer relationship, and that's really where it starts. And so that's why I was really excited when we got the names for who was on this panel. I think really Orlando and Omar and myself, like we've been in this space for a very long time, and we all sort of look at it from slightly different angles. And as Omar sort of laid out in terms of how a customer journey starts with a phone call to a voice bot, to interacting and being able to assist an agent, to being able to do a post conversation survey, to pairing them with the right person. There's really a really ripe opportunity for artificial intelligence across the whole spectrum of applications. So perhaps we can go into what are really both Omar, you've seen the space for the last 20 years. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how really the key challenges maybe 15 years ago to how AI was being deployed, and what are the key challenges for business now in terms of deploying AI?
Yeah, and actually, my angle from the space is a little bit different. Is I came to the contact center space through the marketing space, where I spent a long time, and then built an AI company that essentially became was acquired by Cisco and became the WebEx Assistant. So I've seen kind of different angles on this. But what's shocking to me is when you look at all the different AI applications, the ROI on the contact center case is one of the clearest I see in any business out there, because the number one cost a contact center is going to have is if you've got 10,000 agents spread out over the country or over the world serving your contact center, that is a huge cost. And you can never have enough, because at times of spikes of volumes, you can't just go from 10 to 15,000 at the drop of a hat. You can certainly spike a little bit, but that becomes the number one problem is, can I get to zero wait time and all that? So that's where AI just completely transforms this. There's a case study published that Cisco and Google did on the state of Illinois, where they deployed just a few weeks back, voice bots and chat bots, obviously because of what's going on with COVID. They had to handle 400,000 interactions a day. And so the AI chatbot and voice bot would come in here, do that, of course, lower the curve so that the remainder of the volume that has to get to a human is way, way less. And when they were looking at the ROI for that, they were projecting a savings somewhere north of $100 million. And so it just makes such a great use case. And that's why I think we're seeing post-COVID, lots of organizations are accelerating their tests and their plans for deploying AI for things like voice bots and chat bots for pairing via services like Affinity. So people have had their eye on this for a long time, but I think it's really accelerating now.
Yeah, absolutely. And Orlando, in your experience as well, you've been in this space and you've been preaching the gospel of AI for a very long time. It really, what has been the shift, do you think, in sort of the enterprise adoption of AI since your sort of early days at Affinity?
Oh, so sorry about that. So I have a very interesting kind of journey with this. I started my career in contact centers way back when I was in college. I was actually a contact center agent, and I had a little bit of every job you can imagine in the contact center. I ran centers, I managed vendors, I worked on the banking side as a client, I set up operations, and then I've worked as a vendor, dealing with software solutions. So I've kind of seen this whole kind of transition in the contact center from where we were, call it 20 years ago, to where we were today. And there's a couple things. So if you think about one of the first things that people tried to do in contact centers is we went to essentially some version of what we would call skill-based routing. Right, a skill-based routing solution would be, you separate your agents by some skill you've trained them on, right? So if a customer declares they would like to speak Spanish, you have a Spanish-speaking queue of agents who can deal with those particular customers. And so that would be skills-based routing. And that was an innovation. At one point, customers would call in, the phone would ring, you'd have no idea what the customer wanted, and you had no idea who to deliver that call to, and the agent would have to answer the phone and try to deal with the system then. So skills-based routing was a big thing. At some point, people went on to what I would call performance-based routing, right? Where you would simply say, of the agents in the contact center. So if Zed, Omar, and Orlando are agents, Omar is the best performing agent, Zed is in the middle, and Orlando is the worst performing agent of the three. And so what we're going to do is just simply send more calls to Omar. When Omar is available, always give him a call. And when Omar's not available, the call will go to Zed. And when both of them are busy, Orlando receives a call. Again, that was an innovation, right? That increased performance. It came along with its own set of challenges, and those challenges were generally on the part of like operational chaos, right? So Omar takes too many calls, a certain level of fatigue sets in, Orlando doesn't get enough calls, so that creates its own challenges in the workforce. And that kind of evolved to what you have today, which is like AI pairing, which is essentially you are looking for the optimal pair between callers and agents, but you're doing this while balancing the real-time operational efficiency so that you're not changing things like handle time or average speed of answer. And so that is a space where effectively you need AI in order to do all those things, in order to get all these things balanced at the same time, because the contact center space is one that is constantly changing. Call volume is different on Mondays than it is on Fridays. Offers change, training changes. There's heavy turnover in some contact center environments. And so when all those things are changing, it's really AI that allows you to balance that and to still deliver some results, where it's just kind of manual things like, skills-based agents just have a limited return over time. So I think part of, understanding the complexities of contact centers is why AI has become so prevalent and so accepted, whereas years ago we were just trying to learn our way around specificity and dealing with customers.
Yeah,
absolutely. And sort of, go ahead, Omar.
Yeah, Zaid, I just wanted to add something, because if you listen to what Orlando is saying, you get to realize that the different applications of AI throughout the journey we talked about earlier are radically different applications. And though we call them AI, they're completely different algorithms and actually different problems. So I'll give you an example. If you think about the optimization problem Orlando thought about, people with an algorithm background can think through kind of the problems you have to solve there. But if you think about a voice bot, what you're talking about with a voice bot is how accurate is your speech to text, and then how good is your intent detection, and then how good is your text to speech, and can you define the problem so you're only trying to solve simple problems that aren't going to immediately escalate. If on the other hand, you look at the live agent assist concept, it's very different. There you're getting, of course, speech to text, but then you're doing intent detection. And then what you're doing is you have to have some sort of discovery mechanism that takes in knowledge-based articles, that takes, past resolutions. and then you're learning something that gets passed back to a human. If you look at the last phase of it, which is call wrap-ups, that's really summarization. Summarization is a different type of AI problem. So although we call all this AI, you can imagine different companies being really strong in different areas of this, and they're optimizing for different business problems, sometimes even solving for a different buyer within the contact center ecosystem. So it's a really rich area.
Absolutely, absolutely. Really, I agree with you. It's really been a Cambrian explosion of the applications of artificial intelligence in the contact center and just all the different places it can be applied. And again, and I think really it goes, and the reason is because it's just become probably the most strategic function of any modern company. Customers are no longer, customers are no longer comfortable to the same extent of in-person interactions. And that's probably going to be a world that we'll live in for the next at least couple of years. And these really digital interactions are going to be key for any kind of customer relationship long term. And so looking at that and looking at that strategic function in the contact center and how important it is for a business, really figuring out really what is the operating system and what are the different applications that can really deliver that ultimate customer experience in that contact center. And for myself, the reason I actually got into space, I was actually originally working on self-driving cars. So I was doing a PhD at the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Lab. And what we were really working on is figuring out, okay, where can artificial intelligence have the most impact on the world? And our recognition was that self-driving cars are still about 10 years away before they sort of hit production streets. And it was actually really that the number of people working in contact centers and the number of people working in the office, almost 3/4 of the world total working in an office type environment. And so if we really wanted to bring artificial intelligence to have the most impact for people in the world, that really was in the office environment. And once you're there, like the huge gamut of applications across routing to voice bots to helping agents just be better and be more effective, that's really just post-call surveys, all these things, just a massive number of applications. And I think for any sort of company, any modern company, they kind of have to look one step beyond the AI, sort of AI branding and AI marketing, and look really what is the application and how do those applications combine together and how are they orchestrated together to really deliver the ultimate customer experience. Because I think that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. Like, how can you deliver better customer experience? Because really, if you aren't thinking about that, or if you aren't innovating about that, then certainly your competitors are, and your customers are not comparing you even against your competitors. They're comparing you against Amazon, and they're comparing against the experience that they're getting through their Amazon sort of interactions. And so it's really figuring out how we can continue to innovate and push forward on that. We have some really great questions come in, and so I'd love to sort of ask, perhaps starting with the top, a really good question from Simon. What are some effective ways that are being used to assess customer experience and satisfaction for AI-enabled contact centers? And so maybe speaking to some KPIs. Go ahead, Omar.
Yeah, so there's a really good question that you asked there, Simon, because earlier this year we acquired a company at Cisco called CloudCherry, and their whole vision of the world is nobody calls the contact center to complain about the contact center. Something went wrong in their journey, and that journey began before the contact center, and if you do things right, will continue after the contact center. So what you do need is analytics that span everything that customer interacts with. So in the case of CloudCherry, they have 17 different listening posts that take in real-time data, both on customer sentiment and interaction data, so that you can identify what goes on in the journey. Then the next phase of that is, you know, before this kind of technology came on, the way you would change a customer journey if you thought something was broken is essentially the highest paid executive in the room, kind of, you know, hippo thinking, would decide, here's what's broken, here's what we need to do to fix it. But now with data coming in on, you know, all the customer interaction and the sentiment, you can do what if analysis to say, well, what if I reduce the wait time? Or what if I increase staff courteousness? You know, if you looked at the attributes that drive something like NPS or revenue or something like that, you could do analytics and predict changes in the journey, how much they move the needle on an outcome like an NPS or a revenue, and you can identify which ones are worth you actually spending the time and maybe automating via AI or better coaching or so on. So we're beginning to see this bleed over from the category of contact center to CX in general. and the understanding that the contact center isn't this isolated thing. It's a view into how to improve the overall journey. And if you use analytics and data, you can do a much better job.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think too. I think customer experience is kind of like the main thrust of what we're trying to do when you're thinking about a contact center and what's happening. The thing about contact centers is that like a typical contact center agent will have more interactions with customers of the client than maybe a C-level executive would have in their tenure. So an agent could talk to more people in a month than like any C-level executive in terms of your actual customers, right? You're talking about constant interactions for many customers. To Omar's point, this may be their only interaction with someone from the client. They may never actually speak to anyone except for this moment in time where they talk to someone in a contact center. And that impression that you leave them with is kind of the impression that they will have of your organization kind of post-call, kind of regardless of what their interpretation was coming in. So this decision around contact centers and how we interact with customers is really important. And then to the question around, what can you do to improve it? One of the key things that AI has brought to the table is, frankly, the ability to measure the actual, interactions, to be able to measure precisely what the impact this is having on a customer. So, I remember full well, to Omar's point, of how, we would decide how customer satisfaction was based on whatever metric we would pick that particular month. And, and my old days at the bank, if you wanted to drive customer satisfaction, you could just waive fees for a week and customer satisfaction would shoot through the roof. But that really wasn't a sense of how satisfied customers were. That was merely just, if you waive the fees, customers will say they're satisfied while you are on your way to going out of business. So it's a matter of intentionally figuring out how to improve customer experience, and AI is a huge part of that. So, we've had many kind of things with this. One of the things that's common today, whether it be net promoter score or some other kind of method to measure, is that AI will give you the ability to actually measure that score down to the agent level. And you can figure out, one of the first things you can figure out is, amongst your agents in the contact center, is there kind of a variable score distribution across customer engagement scores. And once you can then you can take advantage of that. In the past, you just kind of had this one score. So for the entire center, we're at 70. We don't necessarily know what that means at the individual level, and it might not be actionable. But if you know what the score is for every agent, now suddenly you can actually do something about it. You can make some changes.
Absolutely, and completely agree. Like that really agent level interaction. And I think your data point that a single contact center rep really has more interactions than the CEO of the company with the number of customers that they see on a monthly basis. That's really where the edges of the company, where really the company is, the relationships are won or lost. We have a question from Richard, which asks, can AI help curate revenue information so teams share what's most important? Or is info curation still too advanced?
Is that curate information that gets shared with the agent or between agents?
I believe the question's sort of asking really about information about the products and the revenue of those products and what's successful and what's not successful.
Yeah. So there's this interesting, I think this answers the question. I'll give it a chance. There's an interesting HBR case study on T-Mobile. And one of the things that T-Mobile did was really interesting is they designed pods. They basically said, hey, most questions don't really get answered by a single agent anyway. So why don't we create a collaborative pod where the pod has the agent, but then has technology specialists, customer specialists, coaches, resolution experts, all working and mapped to the same set of consumers. So the consumer calls back, they get the same pod. When they changed the design that way, they were able to get all the benefits of internal knowledge in the back office to help the single agent. And believe it or not, their NPS shot up It went up so high, it equaled the NPS of Nordstrom. Imagine a carrier having the NPS of Nordstrom through this kind of collaboration and knowledge sharing on the back end to the agent. So I think that's a really interesting angle in the design of a contact center. I'm not sure that answers Richard's question.
I think that's a very empirical data point, and I think that that's one of the key applications of artificial intelligence is to figure out how is this tacit knowledge shared that's shared in person right now. How can that be shared in a world where folks are no longer sitting shoulder to shoulder, and how do you sort of collect that information and provide it to them in a way that's effective for a better customer experience?
Yeah, the other angle of that is the whole agent assist capabilities, where you're using AI to learn how some other agent solved that same problem for someone else prior successfully, and then you're bubbling that knowledge up to this particular agent so that they can offer that up to the end customer.
Exactly. Ruchi, we just have one more question. I know when Ruchi shows up, that means that the time for the time is ending. There's one question I think it's an important question to ask. Really, how do you ensure equity and minimize bias in training data to ensure minorities and women aren't adversely impacted? I think that's an important question. Orlando, Omar, if you have thoughts there.
No. Yeah, I can take many things, right? So part of it is that one of the things is that it's fairly simple. I gave these examples before around skills-based routing or performance-based routing. It's very simple to simply wait for the best pairing to become available, whatever the quote-unquote best pairing is. If you ignore kind of the KPIs or the operational SLAs or things like that. But the equity piece of this is critically important because, you know, when these are real people, real systems, and so we have to take all these things into account. So actually, one of the advantages over a random distribution of AI is that you can be mindful of this, right? You can actually say that when we're distributing calls or when we're distributing leads, you can actually take into all these fairness. You can say, here is what I'd like to achieve, and I'm going to measure to make sure I achieve it. When you're dealing actually in a more randomized environment, one of the reasons why a lot of this stuff pops up, and we can call it unconscious bias, but a lot of times it's not measured. You're not actually looking at it. It's not measured. You're not being prescriptive about it. You're not being intentional. And because of that, you can kind of just fall on top of a pattern that is just randomly in the data. By pursuing an AI structure, you can go across these things. The other thing is, this is all as important as the data. And so, in the case where I talked about pairing together optimal pairings between callers and agents, keep in mind, if you are a customer-facing organization and you are selling to a diverse population of customers, then it behooves you to have kind of that same kind of, whether it be ethnic or gender diversity or just diversity of thought and opinion represented in your agent base. So this is actually a case where, we're actually pushing for more diversity across the organization, as opposed to some standardization, which is a typical contact center approach, which is we hired Omar, he worked out, let's hire him again. Right. So in this case, what we're trying to do is drive a much more diverse audience.
Thank you so much, Orlando and Omar, for joining us, and Zed for moderating. You did beautifully. Everyone else, thank you for joining us. We'll start another session in just a few minutes on another Zoom on data labeling. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.